There are a few major sightings that stick out in my mind that I covered over the years, mostly with follow-up phone calls to our bureaus in the cities where the sightings took place. For years, Brazil was a hotbed of UFO sightings. During the summer of 1979, for example, a man claimed he had intimate contact with extraterrestrials in that country. His report was trusted because he was a well-known security guard for a large company. The next summer, a truck driver in Rio de Janeiro reported that he and two friends had an encounter on a rural road with a UFO. The story made front-page news in South America, and I remember reporting it here in the U.S. The strangest story out of Brazil dates from 1996. UFO researchers still talk about the incident, but they have gotten little, if any, help from the Brazilian police or the Brazilian government in their investigations. The reports center around the alleged crash of a spaceship and the capture of its surviving passengers. The incident is strikingly similar to the reports of aliens and a crashed craft near Roswell, New Mexico, in the summer of, you guessed it, 1947. As I mentioned earlier, UFOs are no strangers to Europeans. If you put dots on a map as to where UFOs have been sighted, you will find that one section of Europe has been a hotbed of sightings. It's an area that includes Spain, part of southern and western France, and much of England. By the way, one of the most dramatic sightings of something happened to a battalion of the British Army on maneuvers. In the fall of 1970, the men saw a strange, blinding light coming from inside a forest. Their reports are among the most credible ever made. After all, you can't question a full contingent of a standing army at a time when the men had not been drinking. One other element we need to discuss is the recurring assertion that when people have encountered a UFO or strange lights on a rural road, the engine in their car or truck has malfunctioned. Often the vehicle's electrical system goes out too. Many UFO researchers say that the single common thread running through many separate sightings gives the greatest degree of credibility to what people say they saw. As I mentioned, with the rise in the number of people having video and excellent quality still cameras, more and more sightings are being documented. The only downside is that most amateur photographers do not have zoom lens or fast nighttime film, and most sightings consist of fuzzy points of light. Nonetheless, one of the most interesting sightings during the past couple of years happened near the little town of Denver, Indiana. Yes, Indiana again. UFO researchers and national television crews have interviewed many of the 24 people who say they saw and then photographed something streaking across the night sky on several nights running. First, on January 16, 2008, people reported seeing a triangular UFO. For a time, it was said to hover over the top of a house. The owner of the house was able to shoot footage of the craft. It's been seen on several national TV shows and is available on the Internet. The video is actually quite stunning. One interesting thing about watching the footage is hearing the running commentary of the family over whose house the craft was hovering. They are obviously freaked out. The same three-sided object made its appearance several nights in a row. During one of the craft's appearances, a man reported that he flashed his vehicle's lights at the UFO. He said the craft moved in such a way to acknowledge the signal. In the case of the recent Denver, Indiana sightings, the craft was said to be totally silent. I mentioned the supposed cover-up of the presence of aliens on Earth by both the U.S. and Brazilian governments. There has not been a single issue that has been so full of cover-up charges than the entire UFO issue. The conspiracy and cover-up theories that arose after the assassination of President John Kennedy pale by comparison to the accusations made in the past 60 years about what the government does and does not know, what information it is and is not sharing. In recent years, President Bill Clinton worked to have some information declassified, particularly information in the hands of the Air Force. By the way, presidents are no strangers to the UFO issue. There is one incredible case involving UFOs over the White House and other parts of the nation's capital during the administration of President Harry Truman. It happened in the early days of the 1950s. After the sightings, which were documented on radar at National Airport with chase planes sent out, President Truman met with his top advisors. The unclassified transcripts of what the president and others said show that the concern was more than just figuring out what the objects were. More importantly, they wanted to know if they were Soviet craft. One of the conversations between Truman's top aides contains the statement that investigating such cases is, quoting, bigger than the government. One of the participants in the meeting went so far as to say that the information that would eventually come from the investigation should only be shared with the president and several top advisors. The government should not know about this, one person was overheard to say. In other words, if there was a conspiracy to keep the truth from the American people, that conspiracy included keeping the information from Congress and most all government and military leaders. Some experts believe that the early attempts by the military in Washington to hide information about UFO sightings were indeed the result of fear over the Soviet threat. And there is one other issue. Today, after millions of sightings, hundreds of thousands of investigations, there is a growing consensus that the military conspiracy was not to hide the possible presence of alien visitors to Earth. It was to mask its own development and testing of incredible new aircraft. The Pentagon even wanted to include foreign craft that might overfly the United States. If this is true, the Pentagon had a head start because people were already in a panic. They were continuing to hear outlandish claims by the government that they weren't seeing what they thought they were seeing. The government was, in a rather mild sort of way, telling people who sighted a UFO that they were crazy. People were told that they were the victims of mass hysteria. These over and over again assertions by Washington and the military that people were imagining this all served as a very effective kind of reverse psychology. People then believed even harder in the growing UFO phenomenon. The Pentagon in Washington simply covered up their own airborne testing of some pretty radical aircraft by convincing the American public, using carefully chosen words, that the government was lying, and that the common people were seeing things, and the things they were seeing were not military aircraft or test flights of rockets. They were visitors from another planet. Additionally, in the 1950s, the sudden wave of science fiction movies that became the stuff of Saturday matinees spoon-fed the message, no matter how bad some of the special effects were. By the way, the movie that is considered to be the worst movie to ever come out of Hollywood is Plan 9 from Outer Space. It was the brainchild of controversial director Ed Wood. By the way, the alien spacecraft used in this fantastic El Cheapo production was actually two mated and modified pie pans dangling from a string. The actor who played the young police officer in the movie, Conrad Brooks, became a good friend of mine when I lived in Los Angeles. I spent hours talking to him about early Hollywood and about director Ed Wood. Brooks told me that most every movie studio was feeding on the hysteria of the alien scare. It was a great way for people to get their minds off the Red Scare and the McCarthy hearings, he once told me. And when Johnny Depp starred as Ed Wood in the 1994 big-budget movie, Ed Wood, Conrad Brooks was not only a technical director, he was given a cameo role as a bartender in one scene with Depp. So if there was a concerted government-led campaign of misinformation, an increasing number of people think that it was a deception that was born of public fear, made worse by government denials, and then reported by the press.